So, part 2 of, goodness gracious me, however many videos this is going to be to respond to the Christmas comments. I probably will give up after 3. Don't take the wrong way, but if I've done 3 70-minute videos on comment response from the Christmas videos, I'm probably going to decide that's enough before you all get very fed up with Christmas comment response videos. Although, I have to say, it's very easy videos for me to make because it's mostly responding to your questions, which means I just have to answer questions. Easy. Kresta, the Falklands War is probably the best argument for your rusty navies cause small wars theory. Would you say tanker war, Operation Praying Man is another example? Probably. There's a fair number of them where if your navy hasn't been properly maintained as a sharpened instrument of operation, there is issues turn up. Jeff Bybee, please record louder. Well, I have this, and I try and keep it orientated towards me, and it does work quite well. I am going to improve my camera and various other things. I have got it put in and it's all organised. It's just actually getting it all at the house and set up and worked out with all the things we've been having going on recently. It's coming. There's a lot of discussion on the HMS Invincible 1907, the first battle cruiser video, about her name. I did say that I didn't really think using Invincible as a name of the first battle cruiser was a sensible idea. It's very evocative and emotional, and it's invincible, but that does give rather the wrong name for a battle cruiser, because they're very much not invincible. This is the point. If we called HMS Speedy or HMS Splendid, that I could have seen. I always love the fact that when they're building the King George the V class battleships, the first group, that they are called, the battle cruiser that's built for them is called Queen Mary. And that seems to me very sensible, eminently sensible. That it's similar to the battleships, but it's off it, because it's not a battleship. A queen is a very flexible asset in chess. But she's not invincible. She's flexible, capable, able to respond, but it's not invincible. It's an interesting one. Illustrious is one of the suggestions that's been put out here. Or Indomitable should have been the lead ship. All these are good options. Myself, I'd have been tempted to call Invincible Duncan. Just go, well, yes, we name our battle cruisers after admirals and go with that way. That would have been an option to my mind. Then you'd have had Dreadnought and you'd have had Duncan. Kept with a D theme. Devonlord99, hello. One of Sydney's guns, as well as her bow and foremast, still exist. The latter two being memorials in Sydney Harbour. I want to go see those when we're on Australia. There are plans for that, and this is some of the things we are sort of taking of. As a last video of this, I did end it by discussing the Australia trip, some of the costs associated with it, but also that we're looking for ideas. And one of the things we do want to visit when we're in Sydney Harbour is the memorials of HMS Sydney, and so we would like to. We're going to see if we can get to the Australian War Memorial, which is adjacent to one of Emden's guns, also on display there. 2 more of Emden's guns, also in Sydney Harbour. Sydney, one as a memorial to the Battle of Cocos, and the other on display in Royal Naval Heritage Centre. Ah, that's the town class, of course, HMS Sydney, isn't it? Yes. Let me see if I can find my WhatsApp and make sure I sent that. Thank you for that. That's going to be useful. We'll add that into the list of things we're going to do in Sydney. It's going to be getting there, but if we can get there, it's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of good naval history. Working out how we're going to do that is the ideas we've got going about now. Should be all organised soon. Well, from Chicago, put 13 knots under sails alone seems unreasonable given a bark rig and there's a screw sticking out the back. I'm not sure if the Comus class could have their screws raised or not. I can't remember, but they're a fairly decently designed hull. I feel the real. So I had a mental image of Yang Wen Li when you described that guy. It doesn't look scary, but if you know him, he actually is scary. There are a few like that in history. Marcus Fransonian, Clarke, I really enjoyed the previous episode on German cruisers. Making a comment on which on it would be a Dutch wet dream to have these numbers. After rewatching it last night, it's always good to rewatch as you always find something you missed or have different states of mind when first watching. I started reading a bit and wondering, as the Deutschlands were actually ordered during the Weimar Republic, not actually fitting in the plans of the NSDAP Nazi Party, it dawned on me the Germans were like hyperactive kids on sugar rushing in a toy store, wanting to grab everything shiny and new, and yet when they had a design they would keep to it, designs they would keep to it and tinkering with it, so no ship was the same. The comment in your video on the IVS Inca Vias on the did people actually know what was going on? Yes, the American Electronic Boat Company complained about the whole network that was set up to cover it was a German company and should be punished. This was more of a competition argument, as the Electric Boat Company, Vickers, Bethnal Steel, Vickers Canada, the British Admiralty had set up an exact same network to go around the treaties to deliver 10 submarines to the Royal Navy, with IVS Inakos being the main competitors as they snatched contracts of building and or designing submarines for countries like the Soviet Union, Romania, Norway, actually a modified Type 7s in Norway in 1940, Sweden, Turkey. This could be found in the US Senate Resolution 206-284, Congress March 13th, 1934. Appendix 148, Hearing Senate Commissions 206, Behavior of the Indios Canto Wurde Schiffsbau in The Hague, in Gauss. Quite a good and interesting read. It is. For the German fleet plans and construction, there was a severe lack in balance between doctrines, two admirals fighting over submarines or service fleet, technical innovations and progress, standardization, pragmatism, economic sense in resources and personal logistics. They had a neutral nation to the west, good relations with that nation, a nation that knew how to be as efficient as possible with what was available. As when they got off the disarmament lobby, they struck the nation in the 20s in economic backlash of the Great Depression. They set out on a doctrine, looked at what was needed, and built ships accordingly based on doctrine, surface ships, cruisers and destroyers, keeping escorts and service ships occupied while Wolfpack submarines hunted the troop ships and supply ships. They took the Sharnos designs, improved it, standardized its armaments and munitions, dual-purpose AA guns of small caliber, more effective, a propulsion system designed on proven less maintenance and breakdown sensitive designs. When the Germans invaded the Netherlands, they got two cruisers still in the slipway and advanced stage of hull construction. Quite a capable design, better armed than German light cruisers, and yet they started fiddling with the bows, with the armaments, and their roles to become training vessels. They found three scuttled Kallenberg-class ships. The Kallenberg finished but couldn't be towed to England, and the Germans took tests and found, well, not chance of thing on this ship. Although they didn't like the torpedo gun system, they found it better than their own ships, and that made the sensible decision of letting a Dutch company build destroyers based on the Kallenberg class, in large numbers. Seems to me the Germans should have gone to the Dutch, hire a few people in the Dutch Navy in the shipyards, knock some sense in the German Navy rebuilding program. Dr. Clarke mentioned before in an earlier video on which the minor nations would you put in charge and what acts the Navy. Swedish for the Germans and the Dutch for the Japanese. They already had a foot in the door with Hayesman and so Sirius, Ivan Asimka, Nesabu. It could have saved the Germans a lot of issues during the war. Just imagine Germans actually building destroyers that worked, comparable to the Traubel class cruisers and the cavalry ships to build efficient, and ships, and using Dutch shipyards to build them. I can see your point, but the Dutch do have an advantage. It's a big advantage. In the Netherlands, when the person in charge of designing the ship says no, people don't go above him to the local political head and go, oh, but by not including this, we're not being a true Nazi. That is the problem, and ultimately the problem in a ideologically driven political state, or in a theocracy, is you automatically have another line of argument to destabilize the person trying to make decisions. Now, this is very powerful if you're a dictator and you want to retain control, because it means people below you are always fighting over the positions below you before they can, of course, there's no one higher they can appeal to other than you. but it's very problematic if you're trying to actually build something equivalent to a decent navy. Very problematic. Insurance. Problem. Alex Invincible was the last of her class, both laid down and completed. Was Armstrong actually the lead yard? John Brown's with Inflexible seems a better fit, even though Armstrong is, of course, very capable. Lead ordered, lead yard, and lead design, but plus the class namesake is decided by Fisher, so officially considered the first. Remember, it wasn't just Armstrong, it was Armstrong Whitworth Ellswick, the commercial cruiser yard of the time. Jones, yes. How come they lay down last as lead yard? They'd had to produce the detailed drawings. Was it just the slip wasn't ready? Pretty much, but also you have to remember that they are lead the yard in a time when naval constructors provided very detailed drawings. Then those drawings get consulted on. The return the DNC, then master drawings gets into all the yards involved. Then their suggestions come back. Then a final set are sent out, and then it depends upon when the slips come free, and if there are delays and ongoing projects, dates will slip, and hey, you have a class launched, the Invincible class. Section 90. Oh, this is on the Grozny Kynda class. Ooh, we've moved on. I've always found it interesting that the Soviets were content to modify land-based sounds for naval use, while the USN and Royal Navy had completely different sounds from land-based counterparts. Yes, but there is a reason. The US Navy and Royal Navy could look at their land-based counterparts and go, "You're morons." Seriously, though. What they would tend to do is they would look for things like... There would be some commonalities between the designs, but for ship systems, A, they had to be designed for ship logistics, especially when it was pre-VLS and they were actually moving equipment around by ship logistics, and B, they had to be designed to deal with salt water. And these things start to make a lot of changes. It's kind of like aircraft being designed to operate from a carrier versus land. In that, people often go, well, it's an aircraft, surely you can take it and fit it. Well, no. Salt water is nasty, and doing a crash landing on a carrier might be a controlled crash landing, but it's still a crash landing, so you're going to need actually a tougher built aircraft. Salt water gets into everything. Electronics especially do not like salt water and the temperature variations you get at sea. Therefore, this affects your missile design. It affects how you design your casing, how you design your seals. You have to have your seals being salt waterproof so that it doesn't get to electronics inside. You have to have all sorts of things designed around it, and all those little changes add up to making it a big difference in the actual design. Andrew Cox then makes another interesting point. There was a discussion on the Invincible class, but it was this one, the Grozny Kynda class video. Okay, if you have a country looking at either commerce protection or commerce raiding in a conflict with the UK, Invincible changes the game far more than Dreadnought does. To use your metric, what if an Invincible was running around the Atlantic or the Pacific somewhere? What do you send to deal with it? A Dreadnought, you can send 3 or 4 pre-Dreadnoughts. What do you have that can bring Invincible to battle with any chance of winning? 3 or 4 Dreadnoughts, pre-Dreadnoughts, i.e. sovereign battleships versus Dreadnought is an interesting fight. And then it does definitely depend on who gets the range first. Even then, Dreadnought gets to decide the point of engagement because she has the greater speed. So Dreadnought gets to choose when she fights. So she can cross the T, and that puts pre-Dreads, i.e. sovereign style battleships, at a massive disadvantage. But it's interesting. That is an absurd collection of medals. I hope one was for winning well, very rude thing even. Well, this is a response to Gorshkov and all the medals he had. Well, Gorshkov, he won a lot, but also quite a lot with diplomatic niceties. In terms of his Soviet awards, he had the Hero of the Soviet Union twice, awarded in 1965 and 1982. Order of Lenin, 7 times. 1953, 1960, 1963, 1965, 1970, 1978, 1982. Order of the October Revolution, 1968. Order of the Red Banner, 4 times, 1942, 43, 47, and 59. Order of Ushakov, 1st and 2nd classes. Order of Kuznetsov, Order of the Patriotic War, 1st class, 1985. Order of the Red Star, Order for Service to the Homeland in the Armed Forces of the USSR, Third Class, 1975. USSR State Prize, 1980. Lenin Prize, 1985. Honorary Citizen of Sevastopol, Vladivostok, Bernensk, Esk, and Severodonetsk. Campaign and Jubilee Medals, Honorary Weapon, 1968. Foreign awards included the Gold Patriotic Order of Merit, East Germany. Scharnhorst Order, East Germany. Gold Order of the Partisan Star, Yugoslavia. Order of the Sakhbatar, Mongolia. Order of the Hungarian People's Republic, First Class, Hungary. Order of the People's Republic of Bulgaria, First Class, Bulgaria. Grand Cross of the Order of St. Alexander with Swords, Bulgaria. That's going to lead to an awful lot of chest foliage. Teutonic Knight. What would I want to build to counter a Kynda? Boring answer, a carrier. Less boring answer, a lightish escort carrier, as I probably want to use my proper carriers for offensive operations and not stuck with convoys or hunting up and down the Seven Seas. Maybe interesting answer, something like the later converted Tide-class cruisers could work, if I know that the missiles are anti-ship and that they might be used as surface raiders. 4 6-inch guns in double turrets in front, extensive helicopter capabilities in the back, equip the halos with radar to get some warning of the approaching radar and its missiles, power the first salvo and then engage a superior gunfire. Certainly an option. Silver Ballman, hello. As a response to a more accurate estimation of the Kynda cruisers, one would probably add a lot of more pressure to complete the Sepakat Jaguar M. Combined with Salvo Nord AS-12 anti-ship missiles might just do the job. Though I find both its warhead and its range to be lacking, but needs must, though a licensed produced Saab RB-04 would make the job a lot easier. True, but then you've got to move it around the world. Okay, these fighters will make the case that I will do the job, I do agree. But where are you going to put them? You can't just go, well, we'll put them in South Africa. Which airfield? Which airfield are you going to supply the infrastructure to? Which airfield are you going to supply logistics to? The fuel, the weapons, the personnel, the technicians, the food, the spare parts. This is the problem once you start dealing with surface raiders. Yes, you've got a lot of solutions. They are definitely a glass-jaw system. But it's actually putting those solutions in place. That's a lot of infrastructure. That's a lot of things you have to start organising, and that makes life complicated. As a duchy, I would place orders for the RB-04 to hang under the P3 Orion, as the RB-04 might do in a pinch, especially if there was an extended range version, as the Orion could carry a larger missile payload than the Swedish jets. Because I'm thinking that even a near miss of a nuclear-tipped P5 would mission kill my frigate squadron, and even my cruisers have nothing that could even match half the range of their missiles. I agree, and that sounds good, but also where are you going to base the P3s? And I know I sound like a broken record, and I sound like I'm just making spurious arguments to win. I'm not. This is one of the things you have to consider. You cannot... It's one of the things you see in politics, and a lot of people, when they're talking on the news, etc., they give you the glib one-line answer. And what you need are the sentences after that, the paragraphs, the essays that come after that, explaining how you're going to deliver this. And by the way, if ever you have politicians, etc., who cannot give you that explanation, don't vote for them. Doesn't matter which side they're from, the side of the aisle or which political spectrum they are, don't vote for them. If they cannot give you a continuation, do not vote for them. I know this is getting in politics. Always ask for them to give the full answer. Demand better. It's far too common today. And I know you're not doing that, John Bullman, but this is the point of reason of why I'm asking the questions, because you're making these good points, but we need to go further in order to make them work. And it's the same with the ships. You can't just buy the ships. You want to buy the carrier, that's great, but it's going to need escort, and it's going to need auxiliaries to supply it. It's not, and you're going to need to put the aircraft on it. It's all going to cost. Christopher, for the Brits, this is also on the Grozny Kynda class, For the Brits, the problem is a lack of effective anti-ship missile. The best answer I can see is in peacetime, stalk them with the SSNs constantly like you would a boomer, and drop them as soon as things go hot. When a suitable anti-ship missile becomes available, probably 22 nautical mile range Exocets, a Type 12 size Barras d'Or style hydrofoil surface escort, with a pair of 4.5-inch guns on a Mark 6 mount forward, a pair of Seacat launchers port and starboard for AA self-defense, and 2 to 4 cell Exocet box launchers aft. Presumably any remaining weight is devoted to anti-submarine warfare equipment for their secondary role. To give you a vessel capable of escorting a convoy across the Atlantic while assisting in ASW duties, that can also, in response to a sighting report from patrol aircraft or other intel sources, sprinting at around 60 knots to close the contact and engage. Hopefully in this alternate timeline, increased demand for anti-ship missile could lead to something being available before the mid-1970s. Barras d'Or style hydrofoil. Interesting idea. Doing something like that big mentally makes me think you're going to looking a lot of hull strain. A lot of hull strain, but you could probably do it in theory if you got the calculations right. If I am Britain and still serious about retaining control of trade lanes, I suppose a very mobile, cost-effective fleet of ships could hunt down the class. So small carriers of only surface ASW escort frigates and aircraft that could carry some standoff cruise missiles. If I'm not the British or Americans, then, as others suggested, long-range patrol aircraft with punchy cruise missiles would be an effective way to deny the areas to those cruisers. It would work, but again, you need to support them. And the smaller nation you are, the more of a problem it becomes. The more of a problem it becomes, the smaller nation you are. Because less likely you are to have links. Given that their displacement was about a third of the preceding Svolov class, or the contemporary large gun cruisers, like the USS Worcesters or the British Tigers, how it affected their price tag, if there is even applicable an economist economy? Theoretically it makes it cheaper. Theoretically. But there is a lot of technology on that, so one has a difference going on. You have less with one hand, but you have more with the other hand, so cost-wise they are probably neutral. Neutral, I say. Probably neutral. Calvin Gasper, just a side note, the S-125, with whatever modernization, was used to shoot down the F-117 over Serbia in 1999. He even claimed to kill Tomahawk cruise missiles over Syria in 2015, with a rather good launch-kill ratio. Remember, claimed. Yes, and the thing about the F-117, and I think I've talked about this before, when we talk about it, is that I think, whilst there were holes in the aircraft, I have to remember looking at those some of the holes on the pictures, and my dad especially looked at the holes and went, have they added to those holes? Calvin must have ASW on the ship. These ships were to patrol the Baltics and North Sea in weather conditions which sometimes even today prohibit helicopter operations, but not submarines. Besides, the good old RBU is also something to fire against incoming torpedoes. At least you're doing something before impact, what might save your bucket. At least, but certainly not least, the RBU salvo does look great in the propaganda reels. They really do. They do. They look really good, and they're actually quite effective. For what they are, they're quite effective. In the RN, again from Calvin Gasbeck, you had a commenting time on this video. I think you've done 4. In the RN, I would tinker with the Central class, pushing the hull to a minimum of 30 knots, push Gannet AAW versions, as well as missile-armed carrier-based interceptors. And finally, extend the Censure Flight 3, as Hermes was Flight 2, AA, with bigger guns like radar, fire control, also 3-inch and missiles, to be able to intercept those Shadrocks from at least 10 kilometers away from my ships. Some standoff anti-ship aircraft weapons also would be handy, definitely upping the 1962 County-class destroyers. Sounds good. Alangar, okay, this is on the Grozny Kynda class, but as you say, it's off topic. Dr. Clarke, I know this is off topic, but please bear with me. Okay, we will. I have recently had a discussion with someone who considered the action of the Shear versus Convoy HX-84 as a resounding success for the Shear, and our merchant cruiser sunk and 5 merchant vessels sunk. I however contend the mission was an utter failure for 2 reasons. First, that she only sunk 6 of the 36, I think, broadly speaking, right, ships, and second, that Shear was held back for so long by an armed merchant cruiser. Now, please understand, I'm not denigrating the captain or crew of Jovis Bay here. You're not, but I know what you mean. I think it's something approximately 240 Victoria Crosses should have been awarded that day. I would, broadly speaking, agree. However, my argument was it was a failure, sinking a mere 6 out of 36 ships when your opponent only has an armed merchant cruiser with late 19th century 6-inch guns, and the Sheer had Sheer been a town class cruiser, then Jervis Bay would have been eliminated in minutes. Sad thing is that's probably true, but I think Sheer tried our best. But the 11-inch gun you've put, we would have lost 20 or possibly even more of those merchant ships. Possibly. 11-inch guns were just too big for the merchant raider. 12 6-inch guns are more than adequate. Senate, Dido, or Atlanta? Please discuss. Dido, Atlanta would have certainly done damage. The 11-inch guns, they're designed to give you something which can compete against something bigger than an armed merchant ship. And the trouble is, an armed merchant ship is just thin enough, just small enough, that the 11-inch guns, in certain places, if they hit, are going straight through and exploding on the other side. And that's a problem for you. Because especially if you fire armor piercing, you are based your operations off cumulative damage to your opponent. That's the whole point of the fighting. And you're not getting that cumulative damage. Cub Caribou and Jim the Heliphobe both have similar points. Cub Caribou says, was this a modern interpretation of the Admiral Sheer in her class? And Jim the Heliphobe says, those two blocky launcher turrets fore and aft remind me of the Reichsmarine's Panzer Chief a bit. Pretty much. They are, to an extent, a version of them. They are. $8.30. That's it's kind of hard. That's a very impressive collection of gongs. That's for, of course, our good friend Gorshkov, the author of the Sea Power and the State. Until explained, I would have thought Grozny would have been named after the capital city of Chechnya. Well, with Gorshkov, he won a lot, but also quite a lot were diplomatic niceties, Soviet awards. I gave a full list again, and I have mentioned his full list quite a little bit. It's Canada. Aside from the number of decorations he's awarded over a long career, the way Russians wear them has always fascinated and amused me. Instead of wearing bars in the UK, they'll wear multiple copies of the actual medals. Also, I guess in the West, people tend to wear ribbons rather than the medals themselves. At least in most situations, the effect is quite spectacular. The top row seems to be made up of 4 or 5 of the same medal. And, I think if I'm not mistaken, the picture, it starts off with Hero of the Soviet Union, Hero of the Soviet Union, then Order Lenin, Order Lenin, Order Lenin, Order Lenin, and or is it the Order of the Red Banner? Then he gets 4 times on the top. I'm trying to remember the order in which you wear your medals in the Soviet Union. I'm sorry, from memory it's going wrong, so I'm not going to get into that. I'll look it up. Pearl Harbor, Admiral Kimmel, 81 years old. A 60-second video. Moshe Berkovitz. He managed to keep the carriers out, though, and we know how much that helped America get back up in the fight. And as I respond, and if he'd had more tankers and fuel, as both he and Richardson had requested, the odds are he would have divided the battleships into separate task forces as well and kept half of them. Might not have been there, but he gets to blame. And that's the problem. Nenianin, 4 salvos, not 2. Kynda was limited to controlling 4 missiles per time, data link limitation. Well, as Vadim Kuznetsov responds, 58s could fire 4 plus 4 salvo at a time, 4 missiles with data link and target selection, plus 4 missiles in reserve mode without data link and target selection by operator. In this case, most likely they will fly to the target with a large radar signature. Same with Krestas. In other words, what I would say about this is there is enough ambiguity in our understanding of Soviet systems that, frankly, we can't be 100% sure. And I tend to give them the better of the doubt. I tend to give, as a rule, when I'm making estimates on things, the benefit of the doubt and presume it'll work. Because presuming it won't work, and it does, it gives you a lot of problems. Presuming it doesn't, presuming it does work, and adjusting for that, and it not working, gives you a lot of advantages. Nice one. Handock. How much of what Pennsylvania did in the Pacific was Pennsylvania wanting revenge versus their Arizona? Never count out the Pennsylvanians of just wanting to be Pennsylvanians. As my experience of Pennsylvanians is that they do not like to see things done badly or wrong, or people to do, you know, nasty things, and they will react to it. Nelson 1925 class, the story of Britain's Washington Treaty battleships. There's still comments going on that. Still comments coming on today. Raymond, as I understand it, Britain was pretty much bankrupt after World War I. All of these changes to existing guns on essentially low mileage ships would have cost a small fortune. Not to mention the cost of a third Nelson. Stop and think how this was all going to be paid for. And then in the 1930s comes along the Great Depression and money completely dries up. Mass building cancellations and pay cuts, even a mutiny in the Med. There was a mutiny in the North Atlantic. There was a mutiny at home in Scotland. It's all very easy for us to say the Admiralty at the time should have done this, that, but how's the government today supposed to pay for it? Not until Hitler started his nonsense could any responsible government even contemplate rearmament. Ray, there are a few times I will say this, but I will say, I'm going to respond. I'm going to try and be polite, because honestly, I don't think you watched the video. Despite the very common perception, Britain wasn't bankrupt after World War I. World War II is a different kettle of fish, and it's often memories of that combined with the financial issues of the 1930s led to this view of the post-World War I settlement. Yes, there was a lot of debt, but the government chose to repay it much faster than the terms required. Believe it or not, another battleship or changes to existing guns would not have cost that much more. Please note, they were having to buy new barrels for the guns anyway. The barrels wear out, you have to recondition them, repair them, they buy new ones anyway. And they could still have repaid it quicker than repair acquired by a hefty margin. In fact, the changes to guns would have been quite doable, but spread over the refit program anyway, as honestly new barrels were fitted to many ships as improvements in metallurgy became available. Rearmament also started before Hitler rose to power, really, focused on the Japanese threat in the Far East. Yes, the British had started rearmament program, you can trace it back to... Well, Henderson in 1933... picks up a program which has been going since 1930. And whilst you can say, oh, well, you know, that coincides with Hitler rising to power, well, he doesn't seize control till 1931. 1933, between that time he seizes control. They don't really start their building around until 1933 and going on. So the British have actually been building up since about 1930. Even before then, they have been doing things because of worry over the Japanese in the Far East. The Japanese are numero uno threat number one. Believe it or not, they're pointing guns at them quite regularly. And the Japanese are pointing guns back. So, this idea that the British can only justify building up for war because of the Germans are way down the list for most of the 1930s. They are really far down the list of potential threats because they're just not that big. And honestly, it's not until well into Hitler's dictatorship, probably 1936-37, they start really worrying about Germany. Churchill was talking about Germany earlier because Churchill is focused on Germany. But other people aren't because Germany just isn't as big an issue. Pay issues were not about money, also, I want to add this one, so much as trying to force everyone to accept the post-war conditions. The Navy was trying to standardise its pay conditions and terms of service, which were a little less pay. But honestly, on the Navy budget, this wasn't actually that major constraint. We think of today as pay being a huge part of our budget, and it is. But the naval budget of that period, pay was still quite a large part, but trust me, what they were planning on adjusting was not going to be a massive change. It was mainly considered administrative saving, and it was handled terribly badly. The Mediterranean Fleet actually managed it better. The Invergordon Mutiny of the Atlantic Fleet is considered the worst the issue it caused. And that was where the officers basically said, you're going to have this or lump it, and we won't argue for you. And that caused the mutiny. In the Mediterranean Fleet, they said they would argue for it, and there was an adjustment, and eventually the pay system was sorted out, so that enough of the benefits of the previous pre-World War I pay system were maintained, and the standards of the during World War I system were maintained, and the post-World War I pay settlement, which was the cheaper one, was sort of phased in to make everyone happy. But it's a complicated system, and it had been brewing for about a decade when it took place. It's not really to do... It's more to do with the fact that you had a navy which had sailors who were theoretically the same rank, But you can have free sailors, and they're on completely different pay systems. And you can imagine the complications that can cause. P.S. To add some stats to this, as page 320 of Mitchell's British Historical Studies, and I will produce the book, historical statistics shows for the 1920s, with GDP of around 4,000 million, they didn't use billion at the time to describe it, spending on public administration and defence usually stayed just below 200 million. Put another way, the cost of administration of government, presumably to pay off the debt and defence, was less than 5% of the GDP. So paying off the debt and defence is less than 5% of GDP, whilst other services often accounted for as much as sometimes more, 12.5% of GDP. Now, these are simple figures drawn from the data as presented in the work, but against these figures, the cost of such ships, especially in that the money would stay within the economy, provide wages and economic incentive in key areas such a course of events, should decisions have been changed, does not seem the improbable or even the undesirable to the government of the time. I.e., they don't want to build ships because they do like to save money, but if they do choose to build ships and build slightly more ships, or they have to build more ships because of the way the treaty is negotiated, they're not going to be upset with it. Yes, they prefer to spend money on their own projects, but they've got the money there, and they can make these their projects. Right then, and because that's off, 2319, AK-630s were installed on Grozny Varagolovkov in the 80s, along with the Volna N. Fucking lacked them till the very end, yes. Marcus Fransonian, an interesting day, 99 years ago, after the failed beer hall putsch, another failed attempt. And funny enough, the Prince Heinrich the 13th, von Mecklenburg's friend, asked the Dutch royal family for rehabilitation of his family 14 years ago, as his grandfather, Adolf Heinrich, was a fanatical Nazi and friend of Goering. As Queen Wilhelmina was married to Heinrich von Mecklenburg's friend, he is indirectly related to the Dutch royal family. Unlike the Dutch royal family that is widely popular in Germany, the Mecklenburg-Schwerin branch is hated, as Heinrich the 13th wanted to return of the 1871 German Empire. Goodness gracious me. See, the trouble is about that system is you can end up with another Kaiser Wilhelm. And just imagine the fun that would cause at the moment in Europe. Magooch, another interesting video, thanks. I like the vision of the RN, the Lawbringer, descending on a colony. Yeah. Literally, a Royal Navy captain showed up in some colonies where Royal Navy captains showed up and found there's so many problems they wrote a whole constitution for the place. Literally sat down and wrote a constitution for a colony in the space of a night. Got some officers together, went, we have to write a constitution because this place has no laws. We will provide them with a written constitution. Imagine that as your constitutional framing committee. You know, when we think of that, we think of learned people getting together from all. And actually, no, it's a captain's table discussion of Royal Navy officers drawing your constitution together. And do you know what's disturbing, really? If some of the countries which has had it, still sections of that survive because it's quite well written and quite well thought out and put together. It's terribly imperialistic, but it also works, so they've left it in place, because they're pragmatic. About the armament, you quote the ranges 5,000 yards for 64-pounder and 7-inch, 8,000 yards for the 6-inch, and 10,000 yards for the Mark II, but presumably that's the theoretical maximum. As I understand it, the gunnery system time weren't really capable of accurately engaging out to these distances. So what was realistic engagement ranges given the fire control of the day? And the 7-inch 64-pounder could reach out that far? How much of the advantage did the BLs actually have? Breech loadings actually have. Basically, I would usually say if you want effective ranges of the ships in terms of their fire, in terms of you're actually going to hit the target, times the maximum range by 0.75. And that usually won't steer you too far wrong in terms of where you're going to start actually hitting the target. And if you're thinking of actual combat ranges, times them by about 0.5, at which they sort of start to become very, very dangerous. See, Clarke, my first response to the final question of the RN 1960s was build 4 CV-01 carriers to replace the Audacious class and add the Type 82s as squadron flagships, and 42s and 21s as their air defence and ASW escorts, as was the original RN building plan before the government cuts. I think you mean 22s, not 21s. 21s are the Amazon, Ambuscade, all this sort of the A class ones. I don't think they were planning on doing that. It's 22s, though. But then I thought again, and I think the actual answer is a very long-range MPA. Not maritime patrol aircraft, but not another Nimrod. Something with surface search centres on a much bigger airframe, probably a VC-10 or back a 1111. But without hardpoints, making them easier to convert. Once you can find the ships, then you can make the task easier for an SSN like Dreadnought or Valiant Churchill class to get in close enough for a torpedo attack. Or you can move Nimrods or Buccaneers in with anti-ship missiles for an airstrike carrier, if available within range. Note, I'm not saying the CV-01 program should have been scrapped. I just think that a long-range maritime patrol aircraft is a better solution to finding surface raiders, unlike the Soviets with the T-142s, which shadowed many a US carrier battle group from 75 nautical miles away. So raiders don't have fighters to shoot them away. I'm guessing the Soviets will not stand still and develop a naval area defense SAM that they could fit on these small vessels, but there is a limited deck space, so something will have to go to make room for the missiles, and the massive radar they will need on that tiny 5,000-ton hull. You're quite right. I think, again, one of the problems, and I will go back to it, is the infrastructure issue. It's something I always come back to. You are quite right in terms of maritime patrol aircraft, but you're going to need to base them from places. You're going to need to fit out Ascension Island, Falklands, all these places with actual bases which can actually support them. Because if you don't, they can't do it. And you need to have those aircraft built, because you're not going to quickly get them in wartime. You're going to have them built in peacetime. And you're going to have the crews, and you're going to have the infrastructure in place in peacetime, and that's going to cost money. And that's the thing the surface raiders are really built to exploit, the fact that governments won't spend the money in peacetime. Don't know, did they keep 8 missiles and launch tubes all the time, or keep 16 missiles in the magazines until needed? Also, were the launch tubes elevated to about 90 degrees to reload, or were the reloads in tubes in the superstructure? I think a vertical reload would take less space on the hull. The reloads were in the structure again, and the first salvo was stored inside launchers on both the Kynda and Kresta classes. Christopher, in a communist economy where I'm not being properly compensated for my labour, yes, the decision to change as little as possible, do as little work as possible, and assume as little risk as possible makes sense. Outside that, it only makes sense if you've got bits pre-built from cancelled ships on the previous class you want to reuse. Just look, how anti-monarchical and un-multicultural of Dr. Clarke to call the Soviet Union paragon of committees management. Quick check to Austro-Hungarian press of 1918 to find it suffering under the bureaucratic diktat of KU and K committees. For onion, along the mighty K&K Potato Association, and so many others. Although one thing I never would compliment Soviet leadership, under the party and military check committee system, CHK, NV, KDG, KGB, FCB could never cancel... Cancel unit with banned cannibalism on their allegedly beloved motherland and pushed it under? Proud Cossack boots this way. You've lost me a bit, but it sounds fun. Vietnam Kuznets. Not 44 missiles, 64 instead. 64. Instead of a revolver, this is in the Kresta class. Instead of revolver style magazines, Kresta ones were implemented with conveyor type magazines with which doubles the stock of ammo per each SAM. And Kresta 2 got 48 missiles for SAM-3 Storm. There are debates in the books, and there is discussions which books got which. As said, the whole way through, if I had to choose, I went with Norman Palmer's version because he covered the whole period, and therefore there was a standard source that all the ships therefore were compared equally. But that is the trouble when you're doing something which covers over such a long period. You're not necessarily using the best source for information on those ships, using the best source that gives you a standardized approach of all these ships, so that you can compare them equally. Without having to go and do the primary research yourself, which I don't think I'd currently be welcomed by Putin to go and digging around his archives at the moment. I'm not sure. I think I might... judging by my accent and what I've said about his Navy on bilge pumps, I don't think I'd be welcome. Battle of Falkland Islands. The only time the battlecruiser was used correctly. Attached Vashal. Not really. Doggerbank and Jutland both examples too. If you remove one side's battlecruisers, the other side will win very fast. Redden. Gasmeg, look at these quad box launchers, coupled with the tennis court sized radar grills. Firing a full salvo from the RBU, a very nice piece of red Navy recruitment ads. True. A torpedo dropped into a task group, causing disruption, and the carrier rocket keep flying on? Maybe it's just flying on, but would you risk it? Exactly. There is a whole debate again on the warhead weight, but again, Kuznetsov, Vice Admiral Kuznetsov and Wodismu, who did lots of great comments and who really is an expert on service, getting together. But again, I will refer you to the same issue I had. I was doing everything using, instead of using lots of different sources, which is a methodology you can do, but then you have to make using different sources and how one phrases something might be different to how another phrases something. I was using a standard source so I could keep everything on the same platform the whole way through. I was bringing in other sources where relevant to back up and secondary information, but I was using one as the, if I have to pick between different sources saying different things, this is the one I go with. Was Norman Palmer. Norman Palmer listed as 80 kilograms. But there is a debate going on whether or not the warhead for the Storm was 125 kilograms. And Wodismu has an idea for why he thinks Norman Palmer is wrong. He thinks it's actually 120 to 125 kilograms. I'm not going back to rechange the video. I am admitting that I agree with you. I think it was heavier. But I also have the thing, as I explained, I was standardizing so that all the ships were on the same footing. And it's difficult to find a source which covers the entire period. I think the hang on the Russian icebreakers are much better. Travelled in the early 90s on icebreaker and flew many times with an ML2 from the flight deck. Sounds definitely sensible. Justin, given their foreign policy role of deterrence and presence, and the resulting amount of weaponry on their hulls, were they as top-heavy as interwar IJN cruisers? Not quite, because you have to remember there's not the level of armour, etc. on those weaponry as you have on the interwar cruisers. Eric Smith, I remembered Operation North Wedding. I was an 8-year-old living in Shetland at the time. My parents took me on a run up to the exercise area to see what the fuss was all about. Part of the exercise was an amphibious landing on Shetland to recapture it from a Soviet occupation. I remember the Harriers and Buccaneers screaming overhead. I remember HMS Ark Royal sitting off the near horizon surrounded by smaller ships, and I remember the army trucks and Scorpion tanks bogged down to the floor pans on the South Peak, going nowhere. If you want a full-scale, all-up arms dress rehearsal for the recapture of Falklands 4 years later, you couldn't have picked a better place to do it. And I agree it was an excellent exercise. I just think the name needs to work, as I said in the comment response. Penultimate evolution of the Kynda, Kresta 1, Kresta 2 was the Kara class. Soviets in the Cold War, and to an extent, relied heavily upon long-range naval aviation for over-the-horizon targeting using the Bear D big bulge radar with video labeling. This was an interim solution because the Soviets knew the strategy was extremely vulnerable to both air defense and ASW assets. This led to the development of the Oscar-class SSGN to replace the highly vulnerable Juliet SSG and Echo 2 SSGN. Both platforms required over-the-horizon targeting and to surface-to-fire their SSGN-3 and to use their front door, I forget now been a while, for final targeting solution. The Echo 2 was a Type 1, first-generation nuke that was very noisy and required a certain level of power output just to maintain hotel power. They were DC powered. Anyway, just like the USN, Soviet warships evolved as both technology and tactics and the potential adversaries evolved. As I answered, you're starting on the path, but you are one class short of their ultimate evolution. But I'll be getting to that in the videos. Thanks for the comments. You give me some ideas on stuff I want to add in. It's interesting the discussions that came about. B-99, Soviets were never any good at exploiting the lower spectrum. At the time, the US Navy was developing DIFA, VLALAD, sonobuoys and turret rays. The Soviets relied upon broadband, high-frequency sound sources and experimented with submarine-mounted non-acoustic senders on their Victor-class boats. As far as the tail, I don't think in that era the Crestas were around had towed array worth a damn. The Russians were pretty much in the direct path ASW business, exploiting DSC and CZ propagation paths. They didn't have the technology to do it. Oh, you can thank the Walker Spiring. You can thank the Walker Spiring and South Koreans for accelerating their ASW equipment tactics and submarine quietening. I say South Korea because the Russians, via a third party, purchased a precision milling machine to fabricate skewed or scimitar-shaped propeller blades in the 70s. What is new? As far as non-acoustic detectors, the Soviets deployed them on surface ships starting in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and kept them in service. And they were deployed on SSN and SSBN, starting with, as far as I can tell, the upgraded Yankee 1, Project 667AU, with the Yankee 1 with the enclosed bridge, the Tlampskys cable Victor 3s, and the Sierras. The Soviets are often having multiple levels of technology going on at the same time, and that is one thing which is consistent with them. It really does. And we're back to cruiser policy, the Reichsmarine and Kriegsmarine. Goodness, how many comments did that video get? Joseph Eskins, would a 9-11-inch gun Deutschland force a change in the First London Treaty? My thoughts behind this are simple. A Deutschland, to any sensible naval analyst, is at best a super cruiser, especially with 9-gun layout and a cruiser-grade armour. This surely would cause the Royal Navy and USN to evaluate solutions, and in turn reevaluate their needs going forward into First London. As I'm certain that the politicians will still force treaty talks. The threat of a ship that can outrun a battleship of the day and outgun any existing cruiser should provide enough for the lobbies of these particular navies to convince politicians of a need for more tonnage in cruisers, and a larger cruiser overall. So what would the two navies enter these talks seeking in order to allow themselves greater capability, whilst also limiting themselves and keeping the Japan on leash? So then what becomes of the US, Japanese and British cruiser development, at least in the early 1930s generation, and the proposals regarding battleships? Honestly, I'm not sure if the Americans would realise this, but actually there's an opportunity for them to really scupper the Yamato project. If you do allow the Japanese to build, again, stick it to the 3-5 ratio, and you say, okay, right then, so Royal Navy, you're allowed to build 10 super cruisers. You're allowed 15 heavy cruisers and X number of light cruisers in terms of tonnage limitations, and we will allow a heavy cruiser to be built, a super cruiser that's allowed to be, I don't know, let's give it a figure of 18,000 tons. Okay? And you're allowed 10 of those. And America's allowed 10. Japan, you're allowed 6. That's both great for Japan, and where are they going to build it? Where are they going to get the stuff from to build it? What are they going to arm it with? And what's it armed with? What can it be allowed to be fitted with guns? Now, the break at the moment is you're allowed 8-inch for heavy cruisers, for heavy cruisers, 6-inch for light cruisers under the London Treaty, and you're allowed up to 16-inch for capital ships. Now, the interesting thing comes between where do you draw the line for super cruisers. If the Germans are fitting 11-inch, there is a good case to make for up to 12-inch. Now, if you do, then you immediately erase the 14-inch King George V and any 14-inch battleship. Reason is because no one's going to build a battleship which is only 2 inches has only got 2 inches more firepower, firepower per gun than a supercruiser. It just doesn't make sense for you to build something which is 18,000 tons and 12-inch guns, and then you're building something 35,000 tons and it's got 14-inch guns. It just isn't going to sell the politicians. You're going to have to do 16-inch guns. If you go for 10-inch, as I often said, 10-inch is probably the worst gun around. Why? It has all the drawbacks of being battleship grade, i.e. you need a lot of machinery to make it work. None of the advantages in terms of penetration, because for not much more you can get a 12-inch gun, and that's going to be very effective. Or 11-inch gun if you're Germans. And it's not much more weight than a 10-inch, but it's far more effective in terms of penetration and capability. Or you can go down lower to 9.2-inch, and you have a gun which is a far... So, where do you set that limit? Do you set it at 10-inch or do you set it at 12-inch? Because if you set it at 10-inch, I see the British going for 9.2 and going, fudge it, we are not going with 10-inch because there's no point. And I can see the Japanese trying to go to a 10-inch gun and finding it absolutely terrible, and I can see the Americans trying. But then you've got a 9.2-inch cruiser versus an 11-inch cruiser, which the British aren't going to want. So probably it's going to be the 12-inch, in which case you don't get the 14-inch ships. You get them at all 16-inch ships. And the British get a whole new spate of 12-inch guns, in which case you get some sort of a 18,000-ton, 12-inch armed sort of Alaskas coming out. Which would be quite cool. And you get the Japanese Navy getting completely overloaded with their infrastructure, not being able to keep up with building Yamato and these things. Completely collapses and probably doesn't get the carriers finished in time. Because remember, most of the carriers aren't available in 1939. They're not available till 1941. So it's one of those issues that, if you have anything more added onto the Japanese infrastructure, that the actual stuff which is available for them at the start of World War II is not going to be there. So it might well delay the start of the war in the Pacific. There's a lot of discussion over the hangars, and I'm going to go with Michael Kuch's question on this one. The hangar question, whether or not it's worthwhile, depends on what it is you're trying to avoid. Based on the video, you highlighted that there were effectively two choices, both of which could have bad implications. Choice A, lower the flight deck and limiting the spare space. Okay, we know historically they never deployed turret array, but for the designers of the time, if they were told, yes comrade, turret array is the biplane, it'll be ready in just a couple of years, then it makes sense to allow space for it now, making the retrofit easier. Choice B, raise the hangar, which you stated also involves raising the aft missile launcher. Hangar and helicopter combined are fairly heavy, and if that missile launcher is the one throwing 2-ton missiles, that's not exactly lightweight easy. And raising it means you need a longer loading path, down to magazines too. Now, I'm no naval architect, but I do know that putting heavy things high up on a ship doesn't help the metacentric height of stability. So my guess is hangars built were considered the least worst option, and as such it was worthwhile to avoid worse options, at least from their point of view. Vadim Kuznetsov, Vice Admiral Kuznetsov. Choice C, as Berkut A1134A as a design had direct limitation in size due to Sonar's shipyard limitation in hull sizes, and 1134A exactly reached the limit of the shipyard. Let's build something bigger with total array, more missile stock, extra SAM system and larger guns, extra space for a crew, which lived in notably uncomfortable conditions on 103 warships. That's how Berkut BAAB 1034B Kara appeared. What is Moo? Keep in mind that the flight deck height was already sketchy. The Kresta 1 hangar arrangement is level, and I don't think the hangar structure changes placed on the Kresta 2. But the helipad is raised a deck due to seakeeping issues. There are many issues with that helicopter deck. There are many issues. But there are interesting reasons, and there are legitimate reasons I can see for why they end up doing it. I just think you're adding in a load of extra complication you don't need for your helicopter operations. Now, what does Moo then puts in through a massive discussion point. And I like it. But it is massive, and I do realise it's now at an hour, and I allow these 70 minutes. So if I go through his point, that will be the last comment I will get to, because it is quite so big. So I'll say on the Kresta class cruisers, you can find a lovely large comment from What Is Moo. Please go look it up. Okay, B1900 pilot. I'm curious about the system they used for straightening and traversing the Hello. I'm going to assume that it's similar to the Canadian Bear Trap or the system we had in the USN, RAST, but even with a similar system, I'm thinking it would be a little tricky to moving a Halo with any kind of sea state. I think the Russians were into something using a coaxial rotor system. Takes a lot of the issues related to wind and mitigates them. You don't have to worry about the sun direction with this type of system. No. Also, you have to remember that the entire deck of your hangar really moves, because let's be honest, you don't have space to have a lift for your helicopter and also have a floor in the hangar. So it's going to come down, and you're always permanently going to be on it. Your thesis about, also from me, 1900, your thesis about the Kyndas being a testbed is spot on, I'd say. Not only a testbed for hull engineering, weapons and system, but also a schoolhouse for training officers and crew. Development of infrastructure to build and support these ships is also important to continue development of full-on ships. Yep. Match Industrial. I think the hangar was a good idea and clever solution, but only out of context, or as a provisional thing. Certainly it was better than to have it on the open deck, but I don't think it was worth the expense, complication and man-hours put into it, and it would be really good, the thing, if they took their lesson from this and didn't put it on other designs. They did a lot of other designs. It is to an extent the fact that they're building the ship in a system which doesn't have space to build a ship. And Stevens, for the Euro technology, could you work in a video on oceanographic and survey technology? I think I have. I forget which one it is, but I think I have. In the West, it would get leaked to Parliament or have a mountain of memos going around, so no one knows which one the press is going to get hold of. For Euro technology, could you work in a video? And yeah, I did. I will do it. I mean, I think it's in. Brain slowly dying. This is going to be the last video recorded today. I will record more tomorrow. If you turn up on a rust bucket, people won't think you're as capable as you are. A bit stinging there, Doctor. Sorry, Stafford. As on borrowed time with the rusty old Dodge, the fuzz bugged me about it this week. I'm hunting for a replacement. She's getting a full refit, though, come next year. I'm sorry, it's true, though. 1029. 10th degree phrasing, Doctor. 1750, 5th degree phrasing charge. Yes, I agree. That's more bulbous than a rambow. HMS Comus. I was in the Atlantic. I was in the Atlantic. At least the... I will stop telling everyone about that. Please stop telling everyone about the Lincoln coincidences I've come across when it comes to displacement. They've been around for a while. And yes, an OPV is still too unarmed in my mind for the size for that reason. Really enjoyed the rest of the class. Hope you and your whole family are doing well. Doctor, take care and best wishes. Same to you, Steph. Hope you're well. It's a great hangar for a sci-fi show from Richmond. Yes, it is. It is. Steve Clarke. Read a hangar. Had the Soviets watch Thunderbirds and thought it was a documentary. I think it's a bit early for that, but it certainly would be interesting. I wonder if Thunderbirds watched it and decided took it out as an idea myself. Patron 68. What if the Royal Navy went 4.7 inch rather than 4.5 inch for dual purpose? This will be the last question we'll look at today. Probably. May do some more. Look, I made a list of UK ships that got sunk by aircraft on Wikipedia. It just never ends. 55. I say again, 55 destroyers get sunk by aircraft. I bring them up in particular as I think the destroyers are the worst off. There's also 12 cruisers out. Everybody just needs to go and have a look at the Royal Navy Lost World War. It gives a lot of scale to how severe the fight actually was. Yes, it was, and which is why a good dual-purpose anti-surface, anti-aircraft weapon for the destroyers would have made a very big difference. If the 4.7 inch mount had been able to do not just to here, but to here, or even to here, it would have been far, far better off, and the Royal Navy losses would have been far less. Okay, yes, they'd probably still lost some of those 55 destroyers. But if you even dropped out those losses by 15, 20 destroyers, which is, you're still losing a number of destroyers, you think about how that affects operations if you have that many more destroyers available. And also, that is going to be a compounding thing. So if you lose less destroyers, you're going to have more destroyers available for operations, which means you're probably going to lose less because you're going to have more there to provide the air defense. So you're going to have a stronger air defense when you're actually doing the operations. And it accumulates up. So you lose a couple less here and a couple less there at the beginning of the war. You will have more available as the war goes on because of that. Yes, though, the Germans would have had to adapt. Ah, Nick Vorden. Another one for the Gosney Kynda class. Less serious suggestion for West Germany, but Yavuz from Turkey and buy Yavuz from Turkey and replace the on-Eklon turrets of anti-air missiles. Completely replace the propulsion with modern machinery. Give it radars that can cope with the shock of the main gun fire. Her mission would be to do all sorts of port visits in peacetime. In wartime, to be stationed either in Norway or Denmark to protect either the Skagerrak or northern entrance of the Soviet waters. Most serious suggestion: submarines that do the same job as described for the Goeben. Well, that's interesting. It's certainly a different one. I haven't heard that one as an idea before. And then there was a huge discussion. This is on the Soviet Navy 1939-65. And it comes from the first comment on that video, which was Wayne's World of Science Technology. Siberia is actually warmer than places I've lived in Ontario. The importance of the Soviet Navy to understanding today's Russian Navy can't be underestimated. Gorshkov would be dangerous to hug. All those metal pins. Oh, honestly, there was a fact I read recently about Ontario, which is that southern Ontario is the best farmland in Canada, and it's really critical to the Canadian ability to feed themselves. Mick Patterson, it's on average 15 to 20 degrees centigrade colder in Siberia than anywhere in Canada. Hardly fair comparison, Canadian winter versus Siberian summer. Does Siberia hit negative 56 Celsius? I believe it averages almost negative 40 and as lowest around negative 68 or something. I know Arctic is lowest recorded temperature around negative 90 from Mick Patterson. There's a full discussion of it. Speaking of medals, we're not sure that Comrade Brezhnev is dead, but we found a wolf which has defecated medals for the last 7 days. Joke from 1970. Oh, that's a good one. For Brezhnev, that is a good one. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. I will get on into more of the questions from Patron 68 next time. I'll be starting up with them, I think, and the video. But I'm not sure. Let's see how far we have got along at the end of this into the channel videos. So let's see, Patron 68. We've got to Thursday the 8th of December. As far as comments are gone, we have got to Thursday the 8th of December. Oh, there are going to be so many of these videos. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. As with last time, please, comments about the Australia trip, suggestions for what we can do for fundraising, always good. The rough target, as said, we are going to be out there for a long time. We also, this is the thing, we're going to be doing meetups with people when we're out there. We're happy to do, we'd love to do some chats at universities. If any universities would like to come and talk to them. But we're happy to do, we're going to do, like we did in Canada, do some events, we can get together, some dinners, etc. We might ask, well, we will probably ask, like with Canada, for locals to help take a lead in organising those. Because the locals in Canada did such a great job. Stafford, thank you very much. And Wayne and all the others who got involved, thank you very much for that. And B, there is the realistic thing that you will know far better than we do where the good food is. and where the places we can get together and chat with people and have a dinner and have a nice chat with you all and answer your questions and meet up and just generally say hi and thank you for your support. And I know there are probably a lot more people in Australia who know Drac and Gareth than know of me and Dan, but we're all looking forward to it, and we will look forward to meeting you all. Also, suggestions of where we can find Iron Brew. And this is quite serious, because I've been told there is a limit. I am not allowed to bring a separate luggage bag full of Iron Brew with me. I have had this conversation on the phone with 3 airlines, and they've also said, no, I am not allowed to fill up a separate bag with Iron Brew. Although I might. But, well, anyway, we'll see. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care, and hope you enjoyed.